Located in the northernmost Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria and bordering Scotland, Bamburgh is a site of huge significance. It was the kingdom's capital. It attracted saintly figures who helped spread Christianity amongst the pagan peoples, and it was the centre of a national and international trade network. While it was owned by King Ethelfred of Northumbria, he gave this land to his wife, Bebba. The burgh was Queen Bebba's burgh and became known as Bebbanburg. Fans of Bernard Cornwell's books and the TV adaptation, The Last Kingdom, will spot how the writers used the name to make Bebbanburg in that series. It's in these burghs that we can begin to trace the origins of castles in this country. But what do we know about the people who lived within them? Archaeologists at Bamburgh Castle have made some astounding discoveries over the years, including amongst these dunes an Anglo-Saxon graveyard with remains dating back more than a millennium. By the 8th century, Bamburgh was a cosmopolitan centre with people travelling from across Europe. They were pilgrims seeking out saints like St Oswald, a former king of Northumbria who left a permanent mark on this land. St Oswald was made famous by the medieval chronicler Bede in his ecclesiastical history of the English people, written in the 8th century. Oswald was an Anglo-Saxon king of Northumbria from 634 to 642, but he was raised in exile on the island of Iona, west of Scotland, by Irish monks. As king, he wielded political power from his capital at Bamburgh, but he was concerned for the souls of his people as well as their bodies. He was determined to bring the Celtic Christianity that had so influenced his own life to his new realm. He established the monastery on Lindisfarne, also known as Holy Island, just 5 miles north by sea and visible from Bamburgh. He worked with St Aidan, the first bishop there, to send missionaries all over the communities of northern England. Between them, they embedded Christianity permanently in the region and changed British history and religion forever. Bamburgh was the political and military arm of Lindisfarne's religious outreach. Bamburgh's strength was key to the success of their project. Astonishing archaeological finds at Bamburgh shed light on the lives of people here 1500 years ago, and on the impact Oswald's determination had. The Bamburgh Research Project began an excavation in the late 90s among the sand dunes in the shadow of Bamburgh Castle. This dig revealed incredible secrets about the burgh and uncovered artefacts and bodies which tell the stories of some of the people who lived within it and how the castle might have looked in the Anglo-Saxon period. Who were these people and what were they doing here at Bamburgh? To find out more, I'm talking to archaeologist and director of the project, Graeme Young. Do we know what time period those graves come from?
We think the cemetery site basically is in use from around the early 6th century into the 7th, into the 8th century.
Do we know anything about those people?
Well, again, we can only go with the evidence we know so far. None of them seem to have gone hungry. They're quite physically robust stature. Their teeth are in an awful condition, which suggests that they're living a little bit too well. So everything about both the skeletons themselves and what we know of them and their location, which is looking straight back at the palace and quite shielded from the village, makes us think we're looking at the population of the palace rather than the wider community. We ended up with about 8 out of 100 odd people coming local to Bamburgh. Everyone else is from the wider British Isles or from wider Europe, so we're looking at quite a cosmopolitan population.
Are we thinking about potentially Northumbrian royalty being buried here?
You're dealing with very high status individuals, but we're in the first Christian phase, so they're not buried with goods or treasure. So whether the royalty had a separate burial ground or not, we don't know. So they could be here, but we have no way of discerning it.
One of the most interesting things here is that all of the burials appear to be Christian, the majority facing east-west, with the head at the west end. The belief was that on the Day of Judgment, the dead would sit up in their graves and should be facing east towards Jerusalem. Oswald might only have ruled here for 8 years, but Christianity remained, and those who came after him had Christian burials, showing the power of Oswald's determination and faith.
So it becomes associated with St. Oswald, who is one of the kings, who becomes a saint whose cult was quite well known in Europe. He's mostly forgotten these days, but he had cult centres here at Bamburgh, where some of his relics were stored, and on the continent. So he must have been a pull of tourists and pilgrims. We're looking at a royal court that's going to be present intermittently. Also, there's probably trading links, and all of that suggests that this is the reason that people are coming here to Bamburgh.
How would the wooden burgh have looked in the 7th and 8th centuries, when these people were alive here?
It would look more dramatic then. The fortress has always been there because it sits on the rock, so you can't really move it. So today we have this stone fortress, which is a medieval castle rebuilt in the post-medieval period. So if you shorten it a little bit and build it out of timber and fill it with structures, probably very well decorated and likely garishly painted, that would have been our fortress. And we also have evidence from the archaeology that in the lifetime of the cemetery, we go from timber structures that would still have looked very palatial and well built into stone buildings. So that must be a deliberate reference of power. Basically, they're looking how impressive they are that they can build in stone. So it's one of the earliest secular stone building traditions that we think we're seeing.
These high-status individuals from the castle now have a rather special resting place in the church at Bamburgh, where the crypt was in use in the Anglo-Saxon period.
When we did the excavation of the cemetery site, we did want to put the burials back in the village community from which they'd come from, but we couldn't really do that by putting them back on the cemetery site because it's a triple SI. But fortunately, the crypt here in the church at Bamburgh, church that its origins date back to the same period of our cemetery site, has a crypt which has a partial divide. So we're standing in 2/3 of it and the other third behind the wall next to us.
So they're all behind this wall now in separate ossuary boxes?
Yeah, every individual who we identify goes into an ossuary box. So we're looking at over 100 individuals in the end when we've finished the excavation and analysis.
And what do we know about those 100 people in terms of the community that live there? Is there a range of ages?
Well, it is a community. So obviously when you think of a palace, you often think of sort of warriors and kings, but we have complete family groups. So we have all age ranges from basically babies all the way through to very elderly individuals. And we have a mix of male and female as far as we can tell from their biology. And of course, the bones themselves have stories to tell because particularly if you've lived a long life, diseases, overindulgence and work that you do habitually will leave artifacts and marks on the bones for us to discover. So, I mean, one of the individuals we have died very violently because we have weapon trauma on the bones, but thankfully that seems to be very rare.
Each skeleton was given a name by the Bamburgh Bones project that reflected something of its story. Skeleton number 131 was called offslain, an Old English word meaning to cut off, strike down or destroy. He was excavated here. Unlike most skeletons found at the Bole Hole site, he's one of the only skeletons that we have clear evidence for a cause of death. He was struck when he was only about 20 years old by a sharp weapon that cut through the left side of his body. The absence of skeletons with war wounds could tell us that there wasn't a lot of violent battles near Bamburgh when it was being used as a burgh.
Most of what we see is just artifacts of life, and including some very interesting little insights into what people are doing. Terrible teeth as a consequence of perhaps overindulging in mead and feasting. But we do have a number of female skeletons that have tiny little notches on the front teeth. And it's basically they're using their mouth as a third hand, and they're just gripping thread. Which, if you can imagine, how many times you have to do that to actually wear away a little groove in the tooth. So this is someone who's working with cloth, sewing, perhaps tapestry work, probably for their entirety of their adult life, leaving this little artifact behind them.
You can see this impact on the body of skeleton number 360, called Winsome, which means joy, who was found here. The evidence found on her body highlights that she was in good health and had a long life for the period, dying in late adulthood. Along with the notches in her teeth, she had poor dental hygiene. The people living at Bamburgh were wealthy, their teeth were decaying through their rich diet and their access to sugar.
It's just one of those instances where you get this wonderful little insight into what the life that people lived.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.